I always thought about exhibitions, as a method to interrogate a part of history, and to look into a part of history and zoom into an area and ask questions about that certain moment of history. And I was quite interested in the time frame from 1950 up until 1980, because I'm also writing a thesis that's working with that specific time frame. And just to give you a little bit of background, I mean, we all know the history of South Africa, but at that time frame the country was in quite a turmoil. However, this is not what this exhibition is about. I don't want to, it's not a political exhibition. I just want you guys, when you look at the artworks against the wall, I want you guys to consider that moment in history, because some of the themes are quite morbid, and that's the reason for that. So I was specifically interested in the artistic development of especially black artists during the time frame. Because of the apartheid, it was quite unusual for black students to receive formal art training. And there was art centers in South Africa that, really worked with black artists to train them. And we decided then to focus on the Polly Street Center, because most of the artworks available, that was available to us, comprised of people working at the Polly Street Center. Cornelia wrote a lot about the Polly Street Center, so I'm going to give her now
an opportunity.
To tell us a bit more about the center.
Has anybody here heard about the Polly Street Art Center before? Any hands? No? Do you guys know Rorke's Drift? No, who knows about Rorke's Drift?
Yes,
one person. So there were sort of grassroots centers, or community centers. There was one in Cape Town, one in Durban, where black artists had opportunity to be trained. But as I said, these were community grassroots centers. Then in Rorke's Drift in Natal, the KwaZulu-Natal Midlands actually, so we think about that center as being a rural endeavor. They train artists there, particularly as weavers and screen prints. But then in Polly Street, well, I should say, so that was rural. In Johannesburg, they then decided in 1949 to establish this Polly Street Art Center. Polly Street, I don't know, actually we spoke about this yesterday, I don't know where exactly in Johannesburg it is.
We don't really know Johannesburg.
We don't really know Johannesburg. But so it was founded, there was this adult classes for non-Europeans, so obviously then black people. There was actually a council, and they decided, okay, let's found this, let's establish this center. In 1949, then this lady, her name was Eleanor Lorimer, she later became the artistic director in PE. It used to be called the King George V Museum. It's now the Nelson Mandela Metropolitan. She ran the place with her daughter. They were her assistants and some artists as well. Fred Schimmel was one of the volunteers there. I think there are some of his works in this exhibition as well. So they were volunteers. Then in 1952, Cecil Skotness was appointed as the recreation officer at Polly Street. And he was the guy that made it all happen. He encouraged white artists to participate at the center to train the artists there, all their knowledge that they, now remember, like Yolanda and I said, it was a weird time in the country. So the white artists went to universities. They studied at Wits or at UJ or wherever. Black artists had no such opportunities. Polly Street was the place that they had to go to. So Cecil Skotness, he got the participation of these white artists, and he worked very closely with the black artists. I think he must have felt some kinship with these guys. Even you can see in his art, he appropriated lots of African symbolism as well. So there he started working. expanded on the programs that they had. They even had a music section at a time when he was there, just to train these artists. Now I should say there's quite a little bit of confusion actually around Polly Street because it moved. The centre moved to Elof Street. Do you guys know Elof Street in Joburg? That's the main street there. So during this apartheid, during these years, the government at the stage decided, no, they wanted to move these facilities out of the city. So then the Polly Street Arts Centre moved to what was then called the Jubilee Centre in Elof Street. Now, this is what it's confusing. The Jubilee Centre was originally called the Johannesburg Bantu Men's Social Centre. And then it celebrated, this Bantu Men's Social Centre celebrated, it's still the Jubilee, it got 50 years old or whatever it was, in 1949, and then everybody started calling it the Jubilee Centre. And then in 1960, so about 12 years later, the move from the situation at Polly Street moved to the Jubilee Centre. But people still continued calling it the Polly Street Art Centre. Now there are a few key players, I want to say, at Polly Street. The first then was Cecil Skotness, the white guy who, it's sad to have to say it this way, but he was sort of the guy that kept the wheels rolling. But there were also a number of then black artists who were instrumental in the functioning of the centre. The most important one is Sidney Khumalo. Do you guys know Sidney Khumalo? Have you heard of him before? Who was he? Who was Sidney Khumalo? Was he a painter? Was he a printmaker? Was he a sculptor? Anybody? A sculptor. There we go. Yeah. So Sidney, thank you guys. Sidney Khumalo became Cecil Skotness' assistant. That was sort of his position at the centre. But that, I think, was more the official line. In fact, the truth of the matter was the two worked very closely together on numerous commissions. They even actually, they made relief panels for a church in Kroonstad, which is a little bit closer to home. So they were situated at Polly Street, but they worked all across the country. Hello, kom binnen. So Sidney Khumalo then, as Cecil Skotness' assistant, he started teaching students at the centre. We have in this exhibition, do we have Ben Arnold in this exhibition? No. So Ephraim Ngatani, Diran Sigladi, Lucas Satoli, another sculptor. Ezra Michai, did I say? Yeah. All of these guys then started studying under Khumalo. I don't know if okay, so as we now said, the government wanted to move these facilities out of the city, and then eventually in Sidney Khumalo left the centre in 1964 to focus on his own career. A few years later, Cecil Skotness also left. They were succeeded by Ezra Mlechai and Bill Hart, yes. But then after 1964, after Cecil Skotness left, the government decided then to close the doors of the Jubilee Centre as well. And then effectively everything that had happened there ended. But luckily we still have the artworks there. They live on as the legacy of the centre, I suppose.
Yes. So, to come back to the original idea of this exhibition, we zoomed into this moment in history. We focused on Polly Street, and then of course there's lots of research already been done on the centre and so on. But still, it's not a known fact. It's not, you guys didn't know about the centre, and it's such an important piece of history of art for us to know. So the unique angle we gave this exhibition was then to look at the stylistic similarities between the artist that studied at the centre and then the mentor that was the teacher. And I really encourage you guys to go with us through this exhibition and participate you know, in the similarities you guys see. That's why this exhibition is also called Aesthetic Cooperatives, because the artists were extremely influenced by their mentors, but also the mentors by the artists. And then this awesome thing happened that the artists started to teach each other. So it was this like friendship that happened in this center. And that's why I really feel so strong about this exhibition and the importance of this exhibition. I always tell the groups that you don't have to be an artist to understand art, because we at Oliewenhuis we are putting up exhibitions and we get a general audience. I mean, it's not only an art connoisseur that come here, but what we would like to do is to provoke conversation. I mean, and through that conversation, then we start to educate and we learn about a piece of history. Yeah, so we're not going to speak about each and every artwork now. We're also quite a big group. So there's just some key artworks I would like to point out, and please participate. If you want to add something, please speak. And also I want to give you just some of my curatorial choices I made, why I put some artworks together with each other. This room I mainly used work of Cecil Skotness. Like we said, you've heard now, he was a key figure in the center. Okay, so that's a work of Cecil Skotness. Lucky Sibaya, on the other side, was also one of his students. Lucky Sibaya was not really part of the Polly Street era, but in our collection we have extensive works of Lucky Sibaya and Cecil Skotness, and he was a student of Cecil Skotness, and I mean, it's quite obvious that the two artists really influenced each other. Something just interesting about Lucky Sibaya, there's also, you will see on those two walls, there's again a work of Sibaya and then a work of Cecil Skotness, that they both worked with narratives. The Umabata series is, I think it's 14 or 12 woodcuts in our collection, where Sibaya was inspired by, sorry, I just want to read. He was inspired by Welcome Msomi's version of Shakespeare's Macbeth of King Shaka and King Dingane. And this interpretation could be easily misunderstood as Umabata is not the Zulu version of Macbeth, but it rather portrays the historical events based on Shakespeare's plot. So he worked with narrative and he gave it a story, an African interpretation of Macbeth. And Cornelia, you spoke about the...
Cecil Skotness made a series of woodcuts that tell the story of Shaka Zulu. He read a biography on Shaka Zulu and he became fascinated by the figure. He actually made the first print run, like 225 prints, and it sold out the evening of the opening of that exhibition in Johannesburg. Now, that particular one in the corner there, what I like about it is you see Skotness's interaction with African masks. You see the faces of those figures seem mask-like. And then also he paints the figures in a way I feel that they remind of those, I don't know if you guys know those shaman, sun rock art shaman drawings. They painted these weird looking animal hybrid, human hybrid figures. And those two guys, to my mind, I think Cecil Skotness is sourcing his ideas from there. But so there's actually 43 woodcuts in this series, but I don't think they're all in this, no, they're obviously not all in this exhibition.
No, they're not all in the exhibition, but they are part of our collection.
Yeah. Skotness spent time in Europe. He was stationed there during the Second World War. And in Europe, he discovered Picasso. You guys know Picasso? What movement did he belong to? Do you guys know? Cubism. Now, what I like about this painting, right, is it's cubist. Eh? Cubism says you see the same angle from different sides. So here you have a face that's looking right at you, that eye, and one that's looking to the side. Okay? So he employs Cubist ideas, simultaneity and multiple perspectives, but he uses an African flavor when he depicts these simultaneous angles. This is also an interesting example because Skotness experimented with painting on woodcut panels. So this is actually an experimental painting that he made.
Remember, these artists really depicted what they saw around them. They were influenced by the environment. And what's particularly interesting for me about Shishladi's work is that he's portraying this very dark and difficult circumstances around him with watercolor. Have you guys ever tried to work with watercolor? It's difficult, eh? It's difficult and it's fragile. But at the same time, he actually managed to get this feeling of this heaviness, through a very fragile medium. That's just I think an absolute indication of his artistic abilities. And so please go and look at each work and try to capture and try to understand what that artist tried to say. In contrast with the Dumeli Feni, his artworks are there in that corner. We also portrayed the environment, but in such a different way. Loose marks, draw with pen, and has his own unique style of portraying things around him. So and perhaps Cornelia, you can talk now about the township.
Yeah, what I almost forgot to mention next door was, in fact, three types of expression evolved at Polly Street. Firstly, we have the sculpture, which makes sense. If you think about Sidney Khumalo, he was a sculptor. This actually is one of his works. Then there was an African modernism, which is, we don't have to worry about that too much. And then the third style was actually a movement, the township art movement. What they wanted to do was portray these urban areas surrounding Johannesburg, recording it as it really was. Now, ones that I really like are, this one, Our Humble Homes. This is by Ngatane. Now, what's interesting there, these guys, they went to the center to be trained in European styles of art. Even if you look at the Khumalo, just incidentally, this is a bronze cast. It's not a wooden carving, which is more the traditional African way. So these paintings are not only watercolors, they're impressionistic. We can see the brush strokes. We see the play of light and dark, which these are characteristics of the township art movement. The same with Viransi Gladi's child playing with the wire card toy. Just that the second one from the end. In that painting, now it's like Yolanda just said, he uses this harsh environment and actually quite tragic circumstances, but he paints it almost in a light manner. He doesn't want it to be tragic. He wants it to be more light, which I actually quite enjoy. Anything else?
I just want to stretch again. In each room you will see another work of Cecil Skotness. In that room also, because I constantly wanted the viewer to be reminded about Cecil Skotness' presence in this art center. But luckily we were fortunate to have access to other mentors' work as well, like the work of Larry Scully. Larry Scully. And so there's different. I really tried to put a variety of artworks together in one room, but still, work with one theme that's going together. I deliberately put the Khumalo next to the Skotness there because of their working relationship they had, like Cornelia explained a little bit earlier. Worked on relief panels together, on different commissions together, and Khumalo that was employed at the center as well.
Just to mention actually something else that's interesting, that painting right there, Abstract Landscape by Fred Schimmel, And we see 3 of them on that wall there as well. So Fred Schimmel didn't have any artistic training. He was from the Netherlands. He was Dutch. He traveled to South Africa. We moved here, and he started as a volunteer at this art center without actually having any artistic training. He received training at the center. Now he painted almost very bunk these abstract landscapes. So you can see that it's a landscape, right? But it's actually just forms and shapes and colors in space. And the same as with those 3 ones at the back, they are an experimentation in color, right? And in form and in shape. So what's interesting about this entire exhibition, actually, you see the influence of modern European art in South Africa. We have cubism, we have abstract art. In South Africa, in the sort of time period that you would have seen them, if that makes sense.
And just a last thing I want to add, this specific room, was I deliberately put the Dumeli Feni there in the corner next to the Gerard Bengu work, because look how differently 2 artists look at one theme, and that's portrait or portraying a person. So I really enjoy Dumeli Feni's almost satirical way of depicting the body versus the very realistic depiction of Bengu's work there in the corner. So,
if I can actually say something else about this idea of aesthetic cooperative. So keep in mind, so what this means is that these guys were friends, they were partners, they helped each other. So for example, Dumeli Feni met Ephraim Ngatani while they were actually both in hospital with tuberculosis. That's actually also how Ngatani died. He died from tuberculosis. But in the hospital, while they were convalescing, he noticed that Dumeli Feni had some artistic talent, and he encouraged him to go to the center, which he did, and there he sort of found a home. This another white South African, Bill Ainsley, was also involved at the center, met Dumeli Feni there, and they became such good friends that Dumeli Feni started living at his house and working in his studio. So we see there's this definite sort of interchange and exchange and reciprocal sort of mutual exchange between the white and the black artists surrounding Polly Street.
I want to start with this work of Julian Motau. This was a recent donation that by, I can't remember the donator, that was now part of Oliewenhuis Art Museum's collection. I just want to also stretch that we talk now about the artists not that they were not receiving any formal art education, but let alone they never received any exposure. No gallerist really exposed their work in by means of an exhibition or so. But Julian Motau was actually very lucky. Cecil Skotness introduced him to Linda Goodman from the Goodman Gallery in the 60s. And she really became interested in Julian's talent and saw that this guy, has something, yeah. She took him into her home, and she actually gave him art materials because she realized this guy is very talented. Then she also gave him an opportunity to have an exhibition in a gallery in 1976. Just after that, he won the Cecil New Signatures art competition. And shortly after that, he was murdered in Alexandria Township at the age of 20. So, just to make clear that some of the artist work you see here, they were actually very young when they started with their careers in art. And I think you as an art student, or even if you are still in school, should see this as an encouragement that you can actually do something with your art, and you have the power to say something with your art. So he must have been very young when he created these artworks. He was also influenced by Dumeli Feni, and I think it's quite obvious if you go now and go and look at Dumeli Feni's work, you can see the similarities between their style, the way they paint, draw. I deliberately put it together with the sculpture here of Lucas Tole. The lines almost it's communicating well with each other. Then in contrast with Walter Battiss's way, how he portrayed images, people in his painting. So I think it comes a little bit more clearly on different ways how the white artist portrayed something versus how the black artist portrayed it, and then the influences. Again, work of Cecil Skotness. Like Cornelie told you a little bit earlier, he really developed this new way by, painting and carving into the wood and make a painting of it. There he actually combines, the techniques with a little piece of wood with a painting together.
Just to say, this is another one of Schimmel's abstract landscapes. What I like about this one is you can sort of see maybe a farmhouse. This is called heat wave, okay? And maybe a tree. But this red that he uses for the sky, and if we think how hot we were in January this year, you can almost feel the heat rising off the land. At Polly Street we had these sculptures that include Khumalo and Lucas Tole, and also Ezrom Legai. Now, Khumalo and Legai were modelers who modeled in terracotta, and then they cast their sculptures in bronze. I think there's the head of a wise man.
Oh,
is it over here? Head of a wise man?
Is in the other.
Is it in the other room? Oh, my bad. So those are bronze. Now, in contrast, Lucas Tole actually did carve in wood. He was a wood carver like this. And so what they did is they combined modern sculptural ideas with traditional African carving. So with this one, and what we saw with the Khumalo, the seated woman as well, they used these elongated torsos or elongated necks, which is typical of African sculpture. I like this one also because of the gesture of the sculpture. And it makes you aware of your own body in space, and it's sort of like this one, this lady. Just call her a lady.
Yeah, and I think it also relates quite nicely to that work of Durand Sihladi, which is interesting. That pulp painting, that Uhuru Bawana, is made by the same artist that made that very fine, fragile watercolor paintings you saw in the other room. So, and he actually developed that style himself. We did some research, and he actually called it pulp painting, where he worked with the paper, tears it off, put back again. And Uhuru actually means freedom. And Bawana actually means sir or boss or master. So it was this constant, almost plea for freedom and for peace.
At the center, they received artistic training in a variety of media. They were taught how to sculpt, whether that was now wood carving or in bronze as modelers. They were taught to paint using oil paints and watercolors, and they drew in variety pictorial. They used charcoal, they used pens. So actually quite a comprehensive art training. But as Yolanda was also saying, these guys were kids when they started at the center. And they were still going to school, and then they had classes at the center there actually once a week on a Wednesday in the evenings after they came home from school. So it was an extracurricular activity actually that these kids went to the classes for. We included Walter Battiss in this exhibition. He was a sort of a marginal figure actually at the center. He was sort of an established artist in South Africa. He was part of the new group as well, but he didn't like to be called the establishment. He was sort of a little bit against the man as well. So although he wasn't technically ever employed at the center, he regularly visited the center and he interacted there with the different both the students and the teachers. And actually, Walter Battiss was influential in Fred Schimmel's development as an artist.